Today is the second day of the AMENET conference, and we are very happy to be here once again. Today we are concentrating on institutions, policies, governance, and African integration. This conference is being organized by the University of Ghana together with the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and it's about to start. We would like to welcome all of you to the second day of this workshop or seminar. This event is going to be recorded, so we are entreating everybody to accept the confirmation message that appears on your screen. And before we start, we would like you to bear the following considerations in mind. First, it is very important that you identify yourself in Zoom with your full name, including your surname, of course, so that we can identify you in case you need a certificate of attendance. Again, we would like you to keep your cameras and microphones off to avoid any interferences from your side. If you have any questions, you are free to use the chat, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. If you need to contact any organization team member, feel free to also use the chat as well. Now, at the end of each section, there will be a question and answer time, and we'll have some discussions. So there are two sections for today. The first section will start right about now until about 11:30. Then the second section also starts from 11 thereabout. So welcome to everybody. I hope that we all have a wonderful time. Yesterday was great. So with no further delay, I would like to welcome Professor Daniel Trefo, Professor of Economics at the University of Ghana and the AMENET coordinator for Ghana, to give us some recap of the first day activities. So Professor, thank you for attending today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kojo, for that nice introduction. I think you all know the objective of this conference. The idea is to train each other and have a dialogue on these three issues that face the world today. And here, I'm talking about climate change, I'm talking about COVID-19. You all bear with me that if you look at the presentations that were made yesterday, starting from the advisor to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, going through the presentation by myself to that of Dr. Adlena, that of Dr. Nupeza, Dr. Daniel Benefo. One thing that ran through is that institutions and governance are the key pillars that will allow us to fight this problem of climate change and COVID-19, especially when we come to Africa, where institutions, governance are weak. We can also link it to international sort of integration, in the sense that whenever we do have weak institutions, weak governance, we find it very difficult to integrate our economy with the developed world, where institutions are a little strong and where governance is well defined. It is for this reason that this discussion today becomes very, very, very paramount. Having studied and haven't really gone through the key issues presented by the resource persons, having known the problem of climate change, having known the problem of COVID-19, having known the issues that we face, I think we are going to today focus on one of the key pillars that will allow us to solve this problem, and that is on institutions, governance, and integration. I would like each one of us to be very participatory in the sense that if attention to the presentations and bring out your country flavor. Notice that there's a dialogue section. If you think you need to contribute, if you think you need to add, bring it on board so that we all learn from each other. On this note, I would like to thank you so much. I know you are all busy people, but you've taken time out of your schedule to be with us and for us to share ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for that swift recap. We would like to move on to the business for the day, starting with the first presentation. Our first presenter is going to present on the topic ECOWAS and good governance, understanding constraints and policy shifts. And our presenter is Professor Asteris HULIARAS, Professor of Political Science from the Jean-Monnet University, Jean-Monnet Professor, sorry, and of the University of Peloponnese. Professor, please, you may have the floor now. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm very glad to be with you. I would like to thank Professor Jose Maria Mella for the invitation. I'm a member of the AMENET network, and which is, I was previously in a very similar project in East Africa with lead partner, the University of Bradford, and Professor Jean-Marc TROUILLE, who will be with us, I think, is the next presentation. And both projects gave me the opportunity to rethink regional integration in both the European Union and Africa. And but I have written a number of papers, not only on what the European Union can teach Africa, but also what Africa can teach the European Union. I have tried to see how the East Africa community's history can give some clues about the future of the European Union. And in the paper that I'm going to present today, I'm going to rethink how, in an era of democratic backsliding, how the European Union and the Economic Community of Western African States are coping with illiberal tendencies in their regions. So let me start by opening my presentation. Please confirm that you can see. Can you see the first? Okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
So the title of my presentation is the ECOWAS, the European Union and Liberal Democracy Challenges and Constraints. Probably more African countries are holding elections today than in any other period since independence. However, there is a rise in what political scientists call illiberal democracies, or anocracies, or electoral authoritarian regimes. For example, polls by Afrobarometer show that the share of Africans who say they are free to say what they think declined from 79% in 2008 to 70% in 2018. From 2004 to 2018, 12 African countries passed laws making it harder for NGOs to operate. Another 6 are planning to do so. Reporters Without Borders, which is another NGO, said in a recent survey that 22 out of the 48 sub-Saharan African countries were bad or very bad places for journalists. Of course, West African countries are typically more free than those in the East and Central regions. However, even there is a rise of electoral authoritarianism. Each year, Freedom House, another organization, another NGO, publishes a global assessment of democracy, giving each country a score out of 100. Benin, for example, declined in 2020 from the 79th to the 66th position, or from free to partly free. This is one of the largest drops ever for an African country. It's a sad development, since the democratization wave of the 1990s started in Benin. But African democratic backsliding is not unique. Freedom House's average global score has declined for 14 consecutive years. Europe, for example, that is often portrayed as a bastion of democracy, that is more advanced than the rest of the world, has also a problem of democratic backsliding. Democracy in Europe is in decline, even by the more conventional measures. According to the varieties of democracy, which is a big survey done every year by the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, Europe has seen 6 shifts in a regime classification over the past 10 years. Hungary, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia lost their status as liberal democracies and transitioned downward to be electoral democracies. Bulgaria, Croatia, and Romania continue to be classified as electoral democracies. In all these countries, the infringement of individual rights and the limitations on freedom of expression, the violations of human rights, the undermining of civil liberties, and the lack of accountability and transparency are very serious problems. Now, what I'm trying to do is to compare the European and the West African experience on dealing with democratic backsliding or with erosion of democracy by focusing on the role of regional institutions, ECOWAS in West Africa and the European Union in Europe, how they deal with these tendencies. Let me start from the European side. In the weeks leading up to the European Council Summit of December 2020, the governments of Poland and Hungary threatened to veto the agreed upon European Union budget and also 1.8 trillion euro recovery fund if the European Commission did not withdraw its plan to condition budgetary disbursement on adhering to the rule of law norms and principles. 25 of the 27 European Union members welcomed the rule of law conditionality. However, Hungary and Poland felt that the agreed upon no rule of law, no European Union money mechanism was a breach of their national sovereignty and a breach of the European Union Treaty. These two countries threatened to block the budget and paralyze the European Union at a critical moment. Then, at the last moment, with German intervention, a compromise was reached, and the two countries withdrew their veto. Chancellor Merkel was instrumental in reaching this agreement. The rule of law mechanism would not be deployed before 2022, the year that the next Hungarian elections will take place. Intellectuals in Europe and human rights activists were furious. They saw the compromise as a victory of the illiberal forces in Europe. Oxford professor Timothy Gartonas, for example, wrote that the xenophobic, nationalist ruling parties in Hungary and Poland will be able to go on doing pretty much what they please, being paid for it generously, and for good measure, biting the German and Dutch hands that feed them, quote unquote. In a decade in power, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has used public spending to build a loyal business elite, which includes some members of his family and closest friends, partly using billions of euros worth of state and European Union funds. In Poland, European Union cash is crucial to continuing to develop rural areas and small towns where money of the voters of the ruling nationalist party, PIS party, live. The European Union Treaty, Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union, allows the organization to discipline a state when there is, quote unquote, clear risk of a serious breach of the bloc's values. In the worst case, a country's voting rights can be suspended. However, to proceed with Article 7 and move towards suspending Poland's or Hungary's voting rights, the European Union needs the support of 4/5 of the member states. Almost impossible. So this highlights the European Union's dilemma. Pushing too hard could trigger an anti-European Union backlash. The last thing the European Union needs. Pushing too weakly allows Budapest, Hungary, or Warsaw, Poland, to do what they want. Now I'm coming to ECOWAS. In contrast to other African sub-regional organizations, like SADC, for example, ECOWAS has on several occasions stuck up against coup. No other regional economic organization in Africa has focused so much on democracy and good governance, introducing norms, imposing sanctions, and even threatening the use of force. However, ECOWAS has been much less critical of recent slides towards autocracy in its member states. So, my paper, what I'm trying to do is to see why the European Union and ECOWAS are quite reluctant to criticize their member states. It could be argued that the European Union with its 27 member states and ECOWAS with its 15 member states are two organizations with few and rather superficial similarities. I mean, ECOWAS was created in 1975, the European Union in 1958. The European Union has a strong supranational aspect. ECOWAS is, in general, I would say, intergovernmental. It lacks a serious supranational element. Of course, if you see the institutions of ECOWAS and the European Union have almost the same names. But their real power is very different. However, there is one similarity where this paper focuses: how the regional organization can cope with democratic norms and values, or what political scientists call electoral or illiberal democracies, in short, governments that do not respect the rule of law and undermine checks and balances, or to put it differently, regional organizations largely fail to sanction their member countries that undermine democratic norms, manipulate the judiciary, violate constitutional provisions, control the media, and so on. So, from one point of view, the European Union and ECOWAS are not comparable. The level of economic integration in the EU is much higher. And on the other hand, it is not clear which is the main objective of ECOWAS. Is it trade? Is it peacekeeping force? Or a regional governance? The European Union has a more clear mandate to promote economic integration. However, in both the European Union and ECOWAS, there is a country that could act because of its size as a hegemon. In Europe, you have Germany, the largest economy, the largest member state in terms of population and GDP. In ECOWAS, you have Nigeria, a giant in the organization. And also, in terms of different camps, you have this distinction between Anglophone and Francophone states in ECOWAS. You have similar or different, similar fault lines in the European Union. You have this north-south divide or the west-east divide. So, some of the, I'm sorry. Let me, before coming to this, let me come back to ECOWAS. Some of the achievements of ECOWAS with respect to application of regional instruments of promoting democratic governance were the vehement rejection of attempts to subvert constitutionalism by the former president of Côte d'Ivoire, Laurent Gbagbo, combined with a threat by the organization to use force as an option in resolving the matter. ECOWAS has also applied sanctions on some of its member states for undemocratic slights. These included the suspension of Niger, Togo, and Côte d'Ivoire for practices like manipulation of constitution, and Guinea and Mali for coup d'etat. Consequently, zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means seemed to become an ECOWAS norm. The consensus among its member states seemed to be that democracy and democratic governance are not negotiable. ECOWAS has attempted to institutionalize these norms that would entrench good governance and democracy in its member states. However, the protocol mandating this process has in practice been better at preventing coup d'etat and the illegal overthrow of governments than in promoting a culture of good governance and respect for constitutional and democratic practices. Institutions responsible for the implementation of the protocol, notably the ECOWAS Commission and the Community Court, constrained by weak enforcement authority, largely operated in an incoherent and disjointed manner. At the end, West African leaders seemed unwilling to make further big steps forward. In 2015, they discussed a proposal to restrict presidents in the region to 2 terms, but the proposal was ultimately dropped. The more recent limp response of the regional organization to political developments in Guinea and Ivory Coast has shown an unwillingness of the organization to sustain its democratic sensitivities, let alone to become stricter in the implementation of relevant sanctions. So let me come to my thoughts. I mean, this is a paper in progress. This is a research in progress. And my research question is why regional organizations largely fail to sanction their member countries that undermine democratic norms. I think that there are three reasons for this. And these reasons are common both in the European Union and ECOWAS. First of all, is too many member states. It is very difficult to reform a treaty if you have 15, or in the case of the European Union, 27 member states. Any reform of a treaty, of a founding treaty of a regional organization, requires consensus. This makes the whole process extremely complex. If you have a couple of countries that disagree, this was the case with the European Union Constitution. I mean, the referenda that took place in the Netherlands and France, the whole thing is very difficult to be achieved. Critical in regional organizations are the role of hegemons. Germany in the European Union and Nigeria in ECOWAS. For my European Union colleagues, what happened after the EU's, after the 2009 economic crisis and the role that Germany has played is well known. The same, I mean, Nigeria has also played a similar, I would say, conservative role in ECOWAS. Let me give you an example. For example, in 2019, in August 2019, the Nigerian president, Muhammadu Buhari, unexpectedly closed Nigeria's borders with Benin and Niger, declaring that the time had come to end rampant smuggling from those countries. The Nigerian president defended the closure by saying Benin and Niger had failed to police their borders properly and chronic smuggling was the result. But his decision was in clear contradiction to the ECOWAS free movement protocol. I mean, Germany's behavior in Europe after the crisis seemed also to ignore aspects of the treaties that emphasized solidarity among the member states. The third reason for me as a political scientist, this is the most important. And I think that an academic responsibility is that the definitions of illiberal democracy or electoral democracy or democratic backsliding, or there is this term anocracy, remain deeply ambiguous. All these terms are ill-defined, and political scientists are far from agreeing on what they mean. Freedom House, the democracy matrix, the Global State of Democracy Index of the International Democratic Institute, or the Democracy Index of the Economist Intelligence Unit, use different algorithms that produce different results. I think that what we really mean is to find a common way that could define what a liberal democracy is and what are the main, and I think that this is crucial for regional organizations to adopt not only principles of electoral democracy, that we have an election every 4 years, but of what liberal democracy means, rule of law, how we measure it, what we mean with it, civil liberties, independence of the judiciary, respect for journalists and the freedom of press, and so on. So I'll stop here. I think that I emphasize that this is a work in progress. I'm trying, my research focuses on comparisons between African and European regional organizations and try to focus more on their similarities and how they can learn from each other's experience. Not only Africans learning from Europe, as most of the literature notes, but what also the Europeans can learn from the African experience, which is also significant. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Professor, for giving us such a enlightening presentation. I'm actually fascinated about the dilemmas you discussed about, that both African Union, ECOWAS and the EU are both contemplating with, the issue of democracy not actually being practiced in the best way. The contrast between the Article 7 that EU treaty actually demands before it can actually sanction, and the fact that in ECOWAS, we are not also critical in the way we sanction people who are actually advancing autocracy. That's very important. We are very grateful, and also for your 3 reasons that you think that this is happening. The fact that there are too many states, people are not willing, especially the big guys in these unions are not willing to promote democratic norms, and the fact that there is no real consensus when it comes to the definitions of democracy. And we are very grateful for sharing these initial thoughts with us. We are looking for that when the research is fully blossomed, you also, share the findings and what you have with us. Thank you very much, Professor. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the next presentation. Our next presentation is going to be on African integration. We are going to actually look at a comparison perspective, and this is going to be delivered by Professor Jean-Marc TROUILLE, Jean-Monnet Professor of Political Science from the University of Bradford. I'm not sure if I got the name right. But
yes,
Prof,
perfectly right. Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I'm very, very pleased to see so many good friends of mine, even if it's only virtually or in spirit. At least in spirit, we can all be together despite the distance, despite the pandemic. Let me share my screen and we will start straight away. Here we are. Okay, so I will enlarge the, okay. And just bear with me a little second now. It's not quite what I wanted to do. Sorry, I start. Bear with me. I start again.
All right, take your time.
Yeah. Nearly there. Sorry. Right, that's not what it. Anyway. Anyway, I think we can start. So, do you see the full screen? Do you see?
Actually, your screen is not yet shared. We can only see your.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. It's exactly what you want to avoid when you start.
Jean-Marc,
Yeah.
I think you press share screen and then the blue button.
Right.
There.
Yes. Okay. Is that okay now?
Yeah. So just go into the just the slide share so that it could be bigger.
Okay. So do you see the full screen?
Okay, I think you can move on with this. I think you can move on.
Right. I don't know why. Is that any better?
It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
I think
okay. Right. So this is my presentation about African integration in comparative perspective. And I'm sorry for these teasing problems. We've wasted a couple of minutes, but here we are. Well, regional integration, this is not what I wanted to do. Right. I don't know why I have this problem now.
I think maybe you should just put it in the presentation mode. Down there.
Yeah, yes. I have a technical problem here.
Okay.
Okay, I think what I'll. No, it's not right. It's not right. My apologies.
Right.
Why does it do this?
Jean-Marc, from a slideshow.
Yeah.
And then start from the beginning. Like you see slideshow up?
Yes. That's better. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Ooh. Okay, so regional integration has been a global phenomenon, which has been induced by globalization. And this has been an opportunity for Africa. This global phenomenon actually really affects every country because 85% of the world has joined at least a trading bloc. And there are here huge opportunities for Africa. When you consider that intra-African trade only amounts today to 18% of African trade, whereas in the EU, intra-EU trade amounts to more than 2/3. Intra-Asian trade for ASEAN in particular amounts to more than half of Asian trade. And in Northern America, USMCA's trade amounts to 50% as well. So it shows that Africa has a huge potential to actually catch up in intra-African trade. Regional integration is needed in that sense to generate markets with a substantial size that will allow these different entities such as ECOWAS, such as the East African Community, COMESA, etc., to gain critical mass. And it is a process, regional integration is a process that takes place at a different pace across Africa and around the world. As I said, 85% of the world is part of some form of regional arrangement. What are the ingredients of integration? Well, the basis are the four freedoms: the freedom of circulation of people, of goods, of capital, of services, but also you need, in order to maximize what you can draw out of trade and out of region, you need to harmonize rules, you need norms, you need standards, procedures, you need programs, regulatory harmonization. You need, in other words, you need common policies to make things work. What are the driving forces of this? Well, processes are driven by a combination of economic and political forces and expectations from business. From a comparative perspective, let's carry on. How different is regional integration in Africa? So this is the kind of questions we want to answer here. What are its specificities and how could integration processes be strengthened there? The ingredients for successful integration have changed today. 40 years ago, the forms of regional integration were if you wanted a free trade area, you needed to remove internal tariffs. Then if you wanted to push it a bit further with a customs union, then you needed to establish common external tariffs between the different components of your group of countries. In order to reach a common market, then you needed a free flow of capital and labor. So you needed already several of the so-called four freedoms. In order to reach then one further stage, the stage of the economic union, you needed to harmonize economic policy and consider seriously establishing a common currency or a joint currency. And to reach the final stage of political union, then you need political integration. Just as an example, the United States, after 2.5 centuries of political unity, they have reached political union. The European Union would be somewhere here along this line, but this is not necessarily today a calm journey that goes from point A to point Z. It is different. It can sort of fluctuate, and it can fluctuate a lot. And the example of the East African community has shown, for example, that an attempt to integrate the region can actually collapse, because this is what happened. This is what happened to the East African community until it was relaunched in 1999. Let's move on and jump to the next slide. The ingredients in 2021 are different. More sophisticated arrangements are needed. For example, you're more likely to help integration with a toolbox consisting, for example, a sound agreement on the management of airspace, or to give other examples, efficient procedures for delivering business visas, or sorts of very practical matters, a good regional agreement on sanitary standards. These kind of examples are what makes things work. So they're more likely to help integration rather than a customs union or a common external tariff today. Because the international division of labor today is entirely different from what it was 20 or 40 years ago. Moving to the next slide, let's examine the constraints to integration, which are common to Africa, but also to other models. The lack of political and democratic involvements of public opinion, for instance. Integration remains a top-down exercise, which is often technocratic and often lacks real legitimacy. There is also proliferation of overlapping structures in Africa, of overlapping initiatives, which tend to disperse the political energy that is available. There is also a relative weakness of institutional mechanisms, especially in developing countries, where there is a certain form of attachment to recently acquired national sovereignty that remains strong. This is also noticeable, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe, so countries that gained accession to the European Union in 2004, 2007, feel sometimes that they want to enjoy their fairly recently acquired national sovereignty. And that they have to compromise a lot sometimes with European regulations. Persisting regional or local border tensions can also be a major constraint. Think of the Indian subcontinents and the border tensions that you have there. Think of the African conflict areas. Think of Ukraine as well. There is a divergence between declared intentions as well and actual achievements, which tends to produce results that live up to declared ambitions. This ends up in discrepancies between projects and resolutions, speeches, international conferences, treaties, and the reality. The reality is not always what you find on the websites describing the achievements of various regions about their regional integration. It is also a challenge for diplomacy. Diplomats usually they're used to practicing bilateral diplomacy. Sorry. Then they learned multilateral diplomacy, and today they really need to adjust to regional diplomacy. So regional integration movements, and that's another also to bear in mind, they have their ups and downs in Africa as well as in Europe. This was mentioned by Asteris in the last presentation. You often have an elephant in the room. The elephant in the room can be the US in USMCA, Brazil in South America, South Africa in Southern Africa, Nigeria in ECOWAS, Indonesia in ASEAN, Saudi Arabia, etc., Russia in the Eurasian Economic Union, Germany in the EU. But you also have to cope with external elephants. The EU and China in Africa are two external elephants. The US in South America, China throughout Asia, and increasingly throughout the world. What does the global landscape, well, there are fairly distinct approaches between various regions in the global integration landscape. There is Africa, Latin America, Central Asia, the Arab world, where there is a trend towards institutionalizing processes. And that may well be inherited from the European constitutional and political culture. Whereas the Asian model is much more flexible. Institutions are created only where necessary to achieve objectives. No one is actually concerned about where the process is leading. The final purpose arises only once action has been taken, process made step by step as consensus is reached, and new priorities emerge. So this is a more flexible approach. European integration is a very specific case. Regional integration in Europe is an exception. There is a comprehensive process, which is the outcome of a very special chemistry of ingredients, ideological ones, cultural ones, historical ones, project based on peace, which really started in during the Second World War, actually, when political prisoners in camps such as Dachau had, well, nothing to eat, but also nothing else to do than to actually plan ahead and discuss how they would imagine the world after World War II. Yeah, and political prisoners who were grouped from various origins. There were Poles, there were French, there were Italians, there were German as well. So the whole idea of European integration had a real boost because of Second World War. So the never again was a slogan. And that cannot be all these ingredients cannot necessarily be transposed to other parts of the world. So every part of the world will have their own background to their own integration. And solidarity in Europe is at the core of the project. If you look at the EU budget, you find that it is based on redistribution. So 1% of the EU GDP is roughly the weight of the EU budget, which is very substantial compared to 0.3% of the world GDP redistributed at world level. What about supranationality in EU integration? Well, if there is something to be learned from Europe in that sense, in that respect, is that the governance of integration cannot rely on the national model. Something has to be invented if you want to achieve a form of integration that goes beyond intergovernmentalism. So supranational governance is not a high-level replica of national governance. It is a different kind of game altogether. So key functions of governance have to be distributed to different locations in terms of leadership, in terms of expertise, in terms of capability to mobilize resources. And coordinating these different locations is always a challenge. So what are the handicaps now? Poverty levels, which are high in Africa. The high number of small-scale state structures. Africa, for example, has the largest number on earth of countries that are landlocked, and lack of infrastructures remain also a major handicap in terms of roads, in terms of railways, in terms of ports, of power networks, of research centers, universities. The list is long. So it is really the nervous system of economics, of economies, is the infrastructure. Then you find the burden of colonial economic and trade models on structures, which remains a handicap in Africa. And Africa is also distant from major consumer markets. Major consumer markets are in the north, in the global north, or they are in Asia, or they are in North America, they are in Europe. So there is quite some distance. This is a handicap. Africa is also far away from the major markets of tomorrow, which are China, India, Indonesia, Brazil. There is a lack of macroeconomic convergence as well, which would normally facilitate regional cooperation. And there is understandably some hesitation as to what is the right level of integration. Should Africans focus on continental integration under the aegis of the African Union, or should they focus on regional integration? As concerns private sector organizations, Africa is also far behind. These are essential drivers: how to adopt common standards and make economies of scale, eliminate red tape, develop legal systems. This is the kind of handicaps and complications faced in Africa. But let's talk more positively about the advantages and assets to integration. The distance I mentioned before, the distance of foreign markets can be in fact a comparative advantage for the economic integration on the continent. It doesn't have to be a disadvantage. Poverty conceals a considerable advantage for consumption as well. So poverty means that the starting base for consumption is low, so it can only improve if the growth is there in order to ensure job creation and creation of wealth. Underutilization of agricultural production factors could also mean future opportunities. I mean, the agricultural potential of Africa is absolutely huge. Some even claim, I mean, Kagame has claimed that Africa could feed the world. Yeah, this is maybe a bit of exaggeration, but Africa could certainly feed more Africans, and also not only Africans. The colonial borders, the former colonial borders, are the borders established by colonization, put it that way, are less rigid as well than one would assume. It's easier, they are easier to cross, which reflects the considerable importance of the informal economy in Africa. So is intra-African trade really as low as given in official figures of less than 20%, roughly 18%? Nobody knows exactly, because there is a lot of small trade, not always legal, but often legal, a lot of small trade that actually takes place across borders, whether you are between Zimbabwe and Zambia, or between Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso, etc. So trade in Africa often ignores borders. So maybe the 18% intra-African trade figure is not as bleak as it looks. Legal infrastructures governing the economy and business are inherited from, most of the time, the British, or the French, or the Portuguese, and they provide actually usable regional frameworks, which tends to save time. Also, certain regions enjoy linguistic homogeneity and a tradition of free movements of persons, which is also a great advantage. So how could all these processes be strengthened? With leadership, regional integration can take several decades, but with appropriate leadership, then it is possible to do some leapfrogging, to use an expression used in economy and business, and save some steps. Regional integration requires considerable political energy. It requires determination, consistency, understanding of the potential benefits, of course, the ability and authority to exercise the necessary pressures on the home system, fighting bureaucracy, and also interest groups, which are sometimes too narrowly focused on, as the name indicates, their own interest. It is also quite desirable to have a kind of vanguard, a kind of motor engine, a kind of hardcore that would inspire, that would initiate change, and which is sooner or later joined by others. And this is, in the case of the European Union, what happened with the Franco-German relationship, which has been not always an easy one, and often quite a difficult one, but this relationship has been at the core of European construction. Yeah? Germany in itself was either too small to dominate Europe, or too big to be ignored. And also Germany, after the two world wars, had no ambition to dominate anyone. Let's be absolutely clear about this. but the Franco-German relationship has allowed Germany to, West Germany, after the Second World War, to regain credibility on the international stage. And even today, although the generations are changing, even today there is still an acknowledgement and a recognition in Germany, a kind of indebtedness towards France that it has, but that it has helped Germany in that respect. But this is a different story. So improving coordination also between continental, regional and national levels is very important. Pursuing aims at continental level under the aegis of the African Union is sound, it's good, whilst at the same time pursuing efforts in various regions of Africa at regional level is also sound. But also some countries are so huge and have so many different communities that national integration also has to take place. I'm thinking of Congo, yeah, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm thinking of Nigeria. I'm thinking of the Ivory Coast with some 70 different languages and dialects, and so on. So also the actors, the actors are very important. Civil society has a role to play, political parties, unions, business, academia as well, in order to turn regional integration into really a collective project. So sometimes major objectives that are difficult to achieve can stimulate ambition, but it is always important to have a clear direction, to design a roadmap that will offer concrete objectives, integration of services markets, trade facilitation measures, improvement of information available on domestic markets, creation of dispute settlement mechanisms at regional level, adjustment of common external tariff, setting up redistribution mechanisms, financing of regional institutional structures, and so on. So the list could go longer, could be longer. We're into the nitty-gritty, but the nitty-gritty does matter. It's not about creating red tape, it's about making things work, even if red tape is in that respect sometimes indispensable. Finally, there is no ready-made recipe on how to integrate a region and its member states. Each process involves its own conditions, its own dynamics, its specificities, and we know how hard it is with all these different specificities in the African context. Regional integration cannot be transferred, cannot be designed in the same way everywhere. Yeah? Every region has to find their own way, their own path. They can learn from others and from others' mistakes. We can always learn from what other parts of the world do and from what they are achieving, or the kind of difficulties they've encountered. But in the end, each region has to define their own pathway. And what is at stake in the end is to ensure that Africa plays a role in globalization that is up to its potential, because at the moment, in terms of GDP, in terms of trade, the weight of Africa is far too low compared to the way that it should have and that it will have in the 21st century in the international division of labor and also in the world economy. In fact, the world economy is actually waiting for Africa. Right, that was my final comment, and I'm sure we'll have some questions at some stage. Thank you very much. And again, my apologies for the teasing problems at the beginning.
That's fine. That's fine. And thank you so much for the presentation. I get the sense that this presentation fits in directly to the first one by Professor Huliaras. It makes things a bit much more clearer.
Well, we've had many opportunities to work together.
Great. And your last, statement that each region must actually define their own path. That is very instructive. And I think going forward, the discussions and other things that will come will solicit for more information from you and the rest of the team. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
So we move on to the next presentation. This time we are going to look at African economic integration and the role of the European Union. And this is going to be presented by Professor Ainhoa MARÍN, Professor of Economics from the Elcano Royal Institute and the University Complutense of Madrid. Prof, I think you may have the floor now. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor Danso Mensa. I just want to check, can you hear me properly? Is that okay?
Yes, you can be heard very clear.
Okay,
Yes.
that's perfect. So now I'm going to try to share my presentation. Let's see if I'm more successful than Professor TROUILLE. Let's see what happens.
Great.
So I hope you can see the full screen now.
Very
Is that correct?
fine.
Perfect.
Yes,
So I've been lucky for the time being.
Thank you. All right.
So, okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank also in the first place Professor José María Mella for inviting me, and of course the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and letting me have the opportunity to be here and to share some ideas and also listen to very interesting ideas from my African and also European colleagues. What I would like to speak in the following minutes has to do with the idea of analyzing what is the role, the current role of the European Union in the process of regional integration and also in continental integration in Africa. Because the thing is that there's this big question that needs to be addressed in the sense that is the European Union pushing forward African regional and continental integration, or on the other hand, is the European Union as an institution pushing backwards these trends, no? That the previous speakers have been talking about. First, I would like to focus on the EU-Africa economic relations, trying to establish the economic relation and the big dependency in the African countries on the European Union, but also analyze how is China coming in this scenario and how is China gaining importance, but still the European Union at the end will be the most economic, the greater economic partner in general of the African countries. In the second part of my intervention, I will like to focus on political and financial support of the European Union. When I say political, I'm gonna explain some of the legal texts and legal framework and how is regional integration, African regional integration addressed in this legal framework. But also I'm going to talk about some financial support and some examples, giving some figures, not too many figures, but some of them. And in my third part, I would like to focus on the trade support, and especially in the incoherence that the European Union trade policy towards Africa is having in the past and especially now, regarding the establishment of the economic partnership agreements in 2008. No? So finally, I will give also some conclusions, trying to be critical and trying to highlight some points of my explanations. Regarding introduction, I think we all know about all these covers, but the thing is that in the global scenario, the African continent, Africa as a continent, and the African economies in particular have been growing in interest We know this first cover from The Economist in 2000, who really gave a very bad image of the continent, but this whole image at an international level has been changing in the last 2 decades. So the idea is that now we are not talking about, we cannot say that some of the problems that the African countries had in the past have disappeared, but there has been some progress, for example, in democracy and so on. And still we're starting to talk more about the aspiring Africa. Africa's a new global market consumer. Africa's, it was said, like with the capacity to feed the world, and of course, many other potentialities. So in this sense, as in the global context has happened, the European Union has been also trying to make bigger attention, to put forward more attention in European Union-African relations. The new president of the Commission we have now, Ursula von der Leyen, gave a very strong political message when she just got into her new post, because she made, as somebody might know, she made her first official trip outside of the European Union to Africa. It was very symbolic. And she visited Ethiopia, not only because the headquarters of the African Union are there, which probably it's an important reason, but also trying to congratulate the Nobel Prize, the Peace Nobel Prize, Prime Minister of Ethiopia also. No? But at the end, the thing is that this first trip gave the impression that this new commission that we have for more than half a year ago was trying to put Africa as a higher priority on the European Union agenda. This was also combined with change in the rhetorics. The words were also being used differently, because Ursula von der Leyen committed
Hello, Professor.
Could you, I think she has some technical problems.
Some technical problems, yeah. Okay, so as we wait for her,
she go out and she will enter again.
Okay, so she's out now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So as we wait for her, maybe we could, if possible, discuss around the two presentations earlier as we wait. Okay. Okay, so we've had presentations from Professor Huliarás and Professor TROUILLE. I am not sure if participants of the conference or workshop will have any comments for them. So far, I don't see any questions in my timing, but I believe that maybe some people may have some suggestions or comments for them.
Yes, okay. So I have a question.
Great, Professor Mella, you can go ahead.
My question is addressed to underline the relevance of progressing in building single regional markets in Africa. So what do you think about the importance of customs unions and single markets to overcome the issues raised by the current borders in Africa. But Ainhoa is over there.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, so go ahead, Ainhoa.
Thank you, Jose Maria. I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened. I really lost connection completely.
Yeah, but go ahead.
I was the only one who lost connection. So can you see the presentation again, or?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay. So I was just asking, it was me who lost connection? It was a general thing, or it was just me who just dropped?
It was just you.
Okay, so that's what bad luck. I'm really sorry. I had to reconnect. So
we missed you just a little bit.
No, I was okay. I'm sorry. So thank you. I was just talking about this the European Commission, which I think it's a good point of a start. And let's. I was saying that of course Africa has come in the forefront of the interest of the European Union. We can see this politically, at least in the official trip of Ursula von der Leyen to Ethiopia, but we can also see this in the mandate that she gave Jutta Urpilainen and Josep Borrell to elaborate this new EU-Africa comprehensive strategy with Africa. No? And in this word, with Africa, I was trying to illustrate how the European Union is making a big effort to move from a paternalistic approach, more from a donor-recipient relation to a partnership of equals, that I was saying before I just dropped. And then I wanted also to address the question of, because we talk about China and how China is gaining importance in the African continent, but at the end we find, and we can see from these graphs, that even though China probably is a growing trading partner and also investment partner, still the European Union is the main trading partner with the African countries. In general, as you can see, it doesn't matter we talk about exports or we talk about imports, we have around 30% of African exports and imports who are directed to the European countries. We can see China also there as a trading partner. 10% in the chart of African exports, a bit higher this rate in the African imports chart. But at the end, the European Union is definitely, at least by now, probably this could change in the future, and the European Union thinks that, and also it's afraid of that trend. But by now, the European Union is still the main trading partner. We can also see this in what I'm not going to talk about regional. Intra-regional trade, because the previous speakers have already said that, of course, African intra-regional trade, which is also reflected in these charts, and it's also reflected in the graph, in the map we can see below, it's really lower than compared to other parts of the world. But I also agree with Professor TROUILLE that probably these figures are not quite adjusted to reality. Probably intra-African trade is a bit bigger that these figures show, but still the intra-official African trade is low compared to other regions. I was also talking about trends. We can see in this graph that the European Union might be losing some momentum between 2015, 2016, but it still maintains a high level of volume of imports and exports. In the gray line, we can see China, and I think the most important thing is not that obviously China's volume of trade is lower, but the red arrow shows the trend. No, so the trend of exports and imports, trade relations between the African countries and China, as we can see, is growing, and probably this will continue in the future. This is about trade, but we have to talk also about other economic relation, which is investment. In this chart, I tried to show the 10 largest investors in Africa by number of projects. No, not always we see an investment in this from this perspective, But in this case, if we talk about projects, we can see that, for example, that the USA still has the largest number of projects, but we have France and we have Germany and we have also Spain as a big investors in the African countries. For this period, we're from 2014 to 2018. And in terms of creation of jobs, I think it's important to highlight that the Chinese investment is in general more job creating than other types of investment. But in general, if we make this ranking or we think about general volumes, although new investments are sometimes in some African countries, mainly Chinese, if we think about the stock investment, the accumulated investment, then we need to point out the European countries still as main investors in the African countries. So at the end, to summarize, what has to be said is that though obviously there are other economic potential powers like China and India and other emerging powers also gaining importance in the African continent, the European is still its main trade and investment partner. But as there's competence which is growing with this continent, it has become a crucial arena of competition, and the European Union is perfectly aware of that. In the second part of my presentation, I would like to focus on some frameworks, from legal frameworks, to try to find if they have or no, or they don't have a direct reference to what is the purpose of the relationship between the European Union and the African countries, and if the European Union has to do or not has to do something related to regional integration. I would like to start with one of the main legal tests that has been driving EU-Africa relations in the past 20 years, which is the Cotonou Agreement. Everybody probably has heard about it. But the thing is that you find the commitment of the European Union in supporting regional integration quite quickly in the document, because in article number 28, you quickly find that the cooperation of the European Union shall support regional integration in African countries, and also national governments and parliaments in matters of regional integration. So we do have at the very beginning this obligation, I would say, of the European Union to collaborate and support and foster African regional integration, at least on paper. But the thing is that specifically in this Cotonou Agreement, at the same time, we go to article number 37, and it was also said that economic partnership agreements shall be negotiated. No? Economic partnership agreements who have been very controversial at the end, and as I will try to explain a bit further later, they have been in many occasions in coherence with this primary objective of Europe supporting African regional integration. I cannot say much about the post-Cotonou Agreement because, as you know, the Cotonou Agreement had a time frame, and it expired in the year 2020. It expired last year, and it has been replaced by a new agreement. A post-Cotonou Agreement has been called. The state of this post-Cotonou Agreement is that now it has been, I think it was last week, it has been finalized. As you know, finalized means that negotiations have concluded, but it hasn't been signed yet, and of course it hasn't been ratified. No, it's supposed to be the new post-Cotonou Agreement. It said that it's going to be signed by all the member states of the African, Caribbean, Pacific, and also European member states probably during this year, and it will be completed at the end of the year. No? And I understand the ratification process will end in this 2021, and probably will start being into force next year. So we cannot say much about what will come out in post-Cotonou Agreement, but I probably say that they will find some also commitments of the European Union in the sense of fostering not only regional but also continental integration. Let's see. This commitment, we find it quite often in the European Union rhetoric. Now I'm quoting here on my slide the previous president of the European Commission, before Ursula von der Leyen, we had Jean-Claude Juncker. Jean-Claude Juncker also had this speech that was trying to emphasize the partnership of equals between the European Union and Africa. And also after this speech, the African Union European Summit in Abidjan in 2017, what happened is that there was this launching of the new Africa-Europe Alliance. And in action number 7 in this Africa-Europe Alliance that Juncker launched, we had the action supporting the African Continental Free Trade Area negotiations. So we find another example of the political commitment, at least on paper, of the European Union, trying to foster not only regional integration, regional economic communities, but also continental integration. Since then until now, we can find a lot of financial support to the African Continental Free Trade Area in particular. The figure, sorry, I've just found out is more than 47 million of euros. Some of this money went to, for example, creating the African Union Trade Observatory. 9.5 million went to that. Also to facilitating negotiations, 12.6, advocacy and ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area, 4 million, and so on. I don't want to spend more time on the figures, but I would like to point especially that it has been this political commitment, but also financial commitment. What is the last thing that informal documents that the European Union has delivered is this joint communication for defining this new strategy for Europe. The document was delivered on 9th of March 2021. I am sorry, this date is not correct, it's 2000 it was this year, 2020. But the thing is that in this document, we can find again a commitment of the European Union. Now talking about the present, we have 5 partnerships. The European Union is focusing the new relationships with Africa in 5 partnerships. And as you can see in this slide, there's this third one partnership which refers to sustainable growth and jobs. And if we go a bit more in detail, in this partnership number 3, there has to be a commitment, a joint action for fostering regional and continental economic integration. So we see again the political commitment of the European Union in the official documents on paper. Of course, we're talking on paper, but we do have also these commitments, these new commitments, talking about not only now regional, but also about continental economic integration. So there, what is the trick? Where is the incoherence? So where can we find the, I would say, the bad things, or the problems that the European Union might be causing in regional or integration in Africa in general? Then we have to move to the trade cooperation. As we know, the European market is open to African exports since Lomé Convention. That's quite clear. But the thing is that from then and now on, the European Union has the European Union trade approach has resulted in a proliferation of agreements and types of trade regimes, which are really complicated and in different states of confusion. Because we have European trade regimes with Africa move from the EBA initiative, the Everything But Arms initiative, that covers trade rules with 31 least developed countries. And then we have the economic partnership agreements that come from the Cotonou Agreement. The economic partnership agreements cover 10 countries and also 6 countries out of the SADC, the Southern African Development Community. And then we also have with North Africa 4 free trade agreements, and also 2 of them being more negotiated in a more profound way. And then we have 3 countries escaping all these trade regimes and moving into what we call the general system preferences of the World Trade Organization. So the thing is that we can see that though we have and the European Union has very strong economic ties with the African countries, the trade regimes are quite chaotic. And at the meantime, in Africa, as we know, especially since January of this year, the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area is one of the most ambitious projects of the African Union, and the political agenda and the commitment of the African countries to this process is quite big. in the previous presentations, we were talking about commitment, the need of political scenarios, the need of governments to really commit to regional integration, continental integration, otherwise this doesn't happen. In the case of the African continental free trade, we see a lot of political commitment. We can see this from the very beginning when 44 countries signed the agreement in 2018, but we can see a lot of commitment now because we have, out of these 44, we have, I think 36 who have already ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we can see that this is a project, this is an ambitious project, and the European Union at the same time is having all these, I would say, a bit of crazy different trade regimes with African countries. So what we could say in conclusion? Well, first of all, that of course we have to admit that from the European Union, there has been financial support to not only to regional economic communities, but also to this new last important project, which is the AFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. And we can also see that on paper, there's been a lot of political commitment from the European Union in all the different institutional and legal frameworks that I've been analyzing, Cotonou Agreement, the declaration of last year, March Declaration, and so on. The problem is that the European Union trade approach has as a result this very large number of not only agreements, but also types of regimes, which is in practice really an incoherence. So I have quoted here Carlos Lopez. As you know, Carlos Lopez is the representative of the African Union to the European Union, and it says that one referring to EPAs is one objective is the EPAs are the EPAs are to interfere in the regional integration processes, whereas the other means African Continental Free Trade Area is to boost it. No, so the immediate impact of economic partnership agreements now in this moment is that they are fragmenting the existing regional economic communities. So my general conclusion, my bet is the thing that the European Union has been accused many times in the past, that they made documents and conferences and declarations with little involvement from African actors. No? And so in this sense, if we need to think that the European Union is making action along with rhetoric, then the future agenda, this new strategy for Africa, the post-Cotonou Agreement, will need to reassure that the European Union is practically supporting also the Pan-African integration agenda. So my bet is that economic partnership agreements need to be revised, because in this moment, actually, I would say that instead of boosting the trade continental integration agenda in Africa, economic partnership agreements and all these diverse different type regimes that the European Union still wants to maintain are pushing backwards this continental integration agenda. So I will stop here. I hope you were able to hear me. I don't know if my connection is quite good. I apologize. Thank you very much.
You are very fine. You are very fine. Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to thank all three presenters, Professor Huliarás, Professor TROUILLE, and Professor MARÍN, for your excellent presentations. Professor Huliarás presented on the ECOWAS and good governance, understanding constraints and policy shifts. He ended with three important reasons why he thinks that both the ECOWAS and the EU have failed to actually place sanctions on, so to call, countries that are not actually doing things right when it comes to democracy. He mentions that it may be a reason for too many member states. There may be issues of unwillingness on the part of big players or big countries who are not ready to promote, democratic norms. He also talks about the lack of consensus when it comes to the definitions of democratic types of democracies. And we also heard presentation from Professor TROUILLE. Professor TROUILLE actually lets us understand that there are ingredients of integration. And he ends that in all of these, each region must define their own pathway. And we just heard the presentation from Professor MARÍN, and she makes us understand three fundamental things: the EU and African economic relations, political and financial, support by EU to regional integration, and also the issues of trade support and the kind of inconsistencies that we find on the economic partnership agreement. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the interesting presentations that we have. So I'll now open the floor for discussions and comments. And I would like to start with Professor Mela, because you were asking some questions before, just when Professor MARÍN went up. So you may take the floor, Professor Mela.
Okay. My questions are two. The first ones are for Professor Asteris and Jean-Marc, and the second one is for Ainhoa. My question is addressed to to underline the relevance of progressing or building single regional markets in Africa. What do you think about the importance of customs unions and single markets to overcome the issues raised by the current borders in Africa? This is the first question. And the second one is, the EU is really interfering the economic integration in Africa. So what, I know, what are, in your opinion, what are the main guidelines for reviewing this negative European trade policy? Okay.
Yeah, okay, so I think Professor TROUILLE would like to take a shot at it.
Yes, well, regarding the potential of to overcome how to overcome issues of current borders, that's quite an important issue, because well, because we have 54, 55 states with borders that are most of the time artificial, although for several decades these states have accommodated themselves with these borders and are doing what they can. And Africans can also trade across these borders fairly freely sometimes, as I mentioned. But trade is facilitated if you have a customs union, and then you, on the basis of this, you can create your common market. But then what about investment, for example? Investment, some regions will be always more attractive than others. Kenya, for example, in East Africa tends to attract more investment than the other member states of the East African community. So in other words, you need regulations. You need to make sure that there is a framework that does not disadvantage some regions, or that re-establish a balance between member states so that there is fairness in the system. What is, I think, the key will be to establish the right kind of rules and regulations to make the system work. So there is some interference. Okay, and to come back to the second question, the EU has indeed adopted negative trade policies towards Africa, but there is now, I think you find different approaches at the EU Commission. There is the approach of the DG DEFCO, which has now been renamed, I think, in Intra, and the approach of the EEAS, which wants to deal with Africa as a whole rather than with its regions. So there are internal differences and divergences within the Commission itself, which we need to observe and be aware of. But as my colleague Ainhoa mentioned, the new Commission has been very proactive in sending strong messages right from the beginning when Ursula von der Leyen went abroad for her first trip. She went to Addis Ababa. She she visited the African Union. This was a very strong symbol, I think. But of course, the difference between symbols and practice is also matters. So we'll have to see how this develops.
Thank you very much, Professor Truly, for your response. We also have two questions. Oh, okay, Professor Ainhoa, do you want to say something?
Yes, I would like, thank you, Chairman. I would like to answer also to Professor Mella's question, because I've said in my presentation that obviously the European Union is interfering in the African regional integration processes. Before, we didn't have the African Continental Free Trade Area working, so it was not so visible, this interference. Though the economic partnership agreements were quite controversial, I think the moment now is quite different. Now the Continental Free Trade Area is a reality. Now it has started, so the European Union cannot continue pursuing regional agreements with Africa. No? From the European Union side, from my point of view, it would never be easy to understand, for example, that inside the European Union, some member states, let's say Spain, Portugal, and France, signed an agreement with let's say Canada, different with a trade agreement that Germany and other Northern European states have with Canada. So if we are not able to understand how inside the European Union we cannot sign freely different trade agreements with third countries, the European Union needs to understand that this different type of regimes has no longer a future, because now we have the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's very high, it's very top on the agendas of the African governments, not for all of them, but for many of them. So my suggestions, what my main idea, I think, is that the European Union needs to have a one and only trade agreement with Africa. No, still so many trade agreements are, of course, a disruption. And though what I say probably it's an utopia, because I really think it's hard to negotiate only one trade agreement. This gives a lot of responsibility and power to the African Union. And I'm not very sure if all African countries would like the African Union to negotiate a one trade agreement with the European Union, which is a question I just leave on the air, because I think that's more interesting to know what my African colleagues think about this. No, and can the African Union represent the whole interest of the African countries negotiating trade agreements with Europe or not? No, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Edward Siniwa, Professor Truly, you want to add some Professor Miller?
Yes, sorry.
Go ahead. He was asked for saying thank you.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Then we'll move on to the next question, if that's fine. All right. So Edward from University of Dar es Salaam is asking two questions. Say that the first one is that, should integration be driven by economic viability or political interest? That's the first one. I think any of the presenters can take that. The second is that there are questions on how realistic the convergence criteria for most of the African regional blocs are. Now, with shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic, how much flexibility should be permitted in the macro convergence criteria without undermining their credibility? So these are the two questions from Edward. I'm not sure anybody can take it from the floor.
Well, the first question is, I mean, a political science question. I mean, there are so many theories ranging from federalism to functionalism and neo-functionalism. And I mean, my short answer is both economic and political factors play a significant role. I mean, for the second question, I mean, Jean-Marc or Ainhoa are far more suitable on myself to answer.
Okay.
I would like to add some comments, especially in this first question. As an economist, I can answer partially, but the things that Edward Teriwa is asking in the chat about should integration be driven by economic viability or political interest? Well, the main idea is that regional integration, continental integration is always driven by politicians. So if politicians, governments are the ones who push forward or push backward these projects, the thing is what moves politicians ahead, no? Economic viability or political interest. In the case of the European Union, the first step for the project we have now was a political movement to create peace between Germany and France. So the European Union project at the very beginning was not looking for an economic interest in reality. It had a real aim at putting these two countries in peace together. The economic issues were an instrument, putting together the coal and steel production. So this just made relations, political relations in a better way with political ties. So I wouldn't dare to say if integration should be driven by one or the other, but at the end we have to understand, at least from the European Union perspective and historical experience, that politics usually come first and economic viability comes afterwards. That's my opinion.
I think I also like to add something here to support what my colleague is saying. If you look at the West African ECOWAS, for example, and that is the reason why it has been very, very difficult for the integration to work well. You know, the politicians sit down. I can give you an example when it comes to the ECO. It was Rawlings and Abacha at that time sat down. We want, ECO in the next 2 years, without looking at the economic implications and see whether that can be done in the time frame. So you see that the politicians, make the statements, they come back and the economic sort of conditions cannot support what the politicians are saying. And that's the reason why up to date, I think from 2008, we wanted to have ECO in West Africa, and to date, we don't have it. Even though, the time, the convergence criteria, one country does that, tomorrow the other cannot, today one does that, the other. So we've still not been able to do that. I think really, the technocrats or the economists will get more involved and be more practical about looking at the way to support the political decision. That'll be fine. But because the politics is leading everything in our part of the world. Politics, I've seen so many things that do not make economic sense, but it may make political sense. And they don't have long-term survival and they die down.
But let me say something, that never underestimate business interests. Business interests play a crucial role, and business interests influence political decisions. Okay, I mean, there are, especially in the European Union, in integration process, not in the initial steps, but business interests have played a crucial role. For them, it was very important to discuss with Brussels and impose norms and standards for a huge markets than go to every single state and negotiate with political players, political actors. So it's not only states that are involved, but non-state actors as well. It's a complex process. The initial dynamics, of course, in the case of Europe was the World War II, but and the need to create, I mean, for a peaceful future. But do not underestimate other interests in regional integration. I think that what is also important to understand is we talk a lot about European exceptionalism or African exceptionalism. However, there are many similarities. We're not so different as some academics or journalists make us to believe. There are so many similarities among integration efforts in Africa, Europe, or Asia. And the way things progress, I mean, it's not a linear process. The role of individual leaders, the way the benefits accrue to certain sections of the population, the divisions, there are so many similarities. So many similarities. So it's both political and economic. Okay.
Yeah.
Professor, you can have the last word on this, then we can move on to the other questions.
Yeah, if I may perhaps just add, I think it's indeed very important not to necessarily dissociate or disentangle economic and political interests. And what really matters is that Africans speak with one voice, and they are gradually endowing themselves with the instruments that will give them one day the potential to speak assertively with one voice. And the AEF-CFTA, for example, is one key instrument. So in order for them to show the rest of the world that they are in charge for their own affairs and that they speak with one voice when it comes to negotiating trade agreements, because that's in the end what has made the strength of the single market and the strength of the European project economically is trade and the possibility to speak with one voice when negotiating trade agreements, bilateral trade agreements with big actors such as currently China and the US. Yeah, so that's very important, and I'm convinced that Africans will have to do the same as well. And it's very important that Africa defends its own interests. So there has to be a political agenda there as well, to my view. Think of just a little example. When Theresa May, the previous Prime Minister of the UK, which is, despite Brexit, an important investor in Africa, as we've seen from the slides presented by Ainhoa, she traveled. This was 2.5 years ago. She did a trip to Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. Incidentally, 3 important economies in 3 different parts of Africa. And then she negotiated there to just replicate the EPAs in place. And what these countries, they missed an opportunity to actually renegotiate them properly. They were replicated, but they could have drawn more advantage from this. And this is not the best way for Africans to defend their interests, their collective interests. They can have a collective strength, and perhaps that's a lesson they can learn from Europe there, very modestly. But when Europe is divided, then Europe is weak. Yeah. And this is something that both autocracies like China and Russia are trying all the time, and what sometimes the US have tried as well, is to try and divide to rule. And Africans have to be very careful about that. That the same doesn't happen to them, because it has happened all along their history, yeah, with colonialism and before.
Yeah, thank you very much for the response. Move on to the next two questions. Hagos Remo, sorry, let me quickly check. Hagos Resson is asking that how should Africa harness its ethnic diversity in its efforts for economic integration? He's saying that we still see economic clashes and misunderstandings within countries and between countries in many African countries. I think any of you can take that. And Professor Daniel Trefo is asking that, do sanctions work in regional integration? And I think this is directly to Professor Huliaras. So you can take these two questions now. I'm not sure if Professor Huliaras would like to answer the question on how sanctions work actually within regional integration.
That's a huge debate. You know, sanction is a huge debate. I mean, people talk nowadays about clever sanctions, focused sanctions, and so on. There is a debate about the effectiveness of sanctions. But if we look at historical experience, I mean, all Africans should remember that the apartheid regime in South Africa fell, and South Africa was democratized, not only because of the ANC and the other democratic organizations' efforts, but also because of the sanctions that were imposed by Western countries. So sanctions, if implemented correctly, can have a real impact. And
All right.
The second thing that I wanted to say is that external interventions, the European Union trying to promote regional integration in Africa, are not necessarily negative. Think about the European Union. European Union was, to a large extent, created, I mean, European integration, not because of so much of the efforts of European players, but because of the pressure by the United States after the Second World War. And this is very important to understand, that the regional integration is not always the result of domestic efforts, but also is the result of external ideas, external pressure. And this is not negative at all. It can be very positive. I mean, the United States wanted, of course, to create a bulwark against communism, against the expansion of communism. But still, they played a crucial role in promoting European integration. And the final point is raised by Lillian. Is democracy the only political standard?
Yeah.
Democracy, I mean, it's not an instrument. Democracy is not an instrument to achieve economic development. Democracy has a value in itself. Democracy is an objective. So, of course, the democracy is crucial. I mean, I am a Greek, what else to say? Democracy is something, is an ideal that we should work for. And it's not an instrument to achieve economic development. That's another story. Of course, no, I'll stop here.
If I may add some comments, if it's possible, on sanctions, adding to what Professor Huliaras has already said, I think sanctions, at least in the European Union experience, have worked when there are sanctions to companies. Sanctions to companies who haven't fulfilled the legal requirements and so on. But talking about sanctions against governments, then this is quite different, because as far as I know, no European Union government has been sanctioned so far. The Spanish government, for example, was threatened to be sanctioned because we were spending a lot of much more than we should. We had a very high public debt, a very high deficit. And so we were threatened by the European Commission that the Spanish government was to be sanctioned, but finally this didn't happen. So sanctions in the European Union work very well when they are fining companies, but not so far when they are fining governments. We don't have, correct me if I'm wrong, no, this experience. But what really works really well, it's at least in the European Union context, are the funds. We have these regional cohesion funds to help poorest countries or poorest regions, and that threaten to stop this help, this aid, these funds to some specific European countries. If they don't do this or that, then this usually happens. But so far, I think the continental free trade areas, of course, and regional economic communities in Africa in general, they don't have cohesion funds, they don't have these solidarity funds. So I don't think sanctions will work so far. No, so I'll stop here.
Great, thank you so much. All.
Yeah, just perhaps a quick remark as well about the issue of democracy, as Asteris pointed out, and very, very rightly, that democracy is not an instrument to achieve economic goals, economic development, integration. It is rather the other way around. That is, it is thanks to integration, economic development, that we can come closer to this ideal of democracy. And if we observe the situation at the moment, when we have international institutions and strong international institutions, then human rights are more protected. Democracy is safer than if we are, and living at the moment in the UK, in a country where the government is increasingly turning towards what I would call Putinism. I can feel here very strongly over the last 5 years that there has been a loss in terms of democracy that is getting very, very dangerous. And the more you are subject to national decisions and to the national level, and the less you are protected by international organizations, and the more critical it becomes, and democracy gets eroded and eroded and eroded. We need stronger international institutions to defend our democratic rights, to defend human rights, and to defend the European values. I'm sorry, these values should be universal, but they're very much European. They're eroded in Europe as well. The weaker international institutions are, the more as citizens we risk to suffer. That was so if you know, the more I'm not talking about the numbers of institutions there, because there is a flurry of various institutions and organizations across Africa. There are too many actually. The African Union only acknowledges 7 areas of regional integration, which is sufficient for the continent, really. But there are more. It's a qualitative. It's not a number of institutions that are required, but it's quality institutions to protect the citizens, to protect their rights.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we've had a very fruitful discussions. That's very interesting, and we are very grateful for your time, presenters. You've made this section very interesting. We'll break now, and we are coming back in 30 minutes. We are coming back at 11:30 Ghana GMT. I'm not sure the time wherever anyone is, but we'll be expecting everyone here by the next 30 minutes so that we can move along for the next session. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. We are very grateful, and stay blessed. Bye.
Thank you.
Well done.